previously at Woods-Oviatt before that. Why I switched law firms is important because I think that's a telltale of where I went from that firm to where I am now. I have always had a multifamily niche. And so multifamily has been something that from the time I was a brand new attorney till, now, it's a passion I've had. I love the real estate industry, but I'm also business minded. And so I wanted to create a niche in real estate investment and to run roundtables for people who are investing in the cities of upstate. So not only do we run these roundtables in Rochester, but we've expanded them out to Syracuse, to Buffalo, to Albany. And along the way, I was able to meet various influential people who have helped get me onto the board of NYCRA. So NYCRA is the actual organization that is the Under One Roof Coalition. So I'm going to explain that in a little bit to go through that and what NYCRA is. But first, I just wanted to thank everybody at Freedom First. We were very much appreciative of the $5,000 donation. We are pretty blown away at the level that you guys wanted to get involved with us. And so we are now coalition members. And what that means is it's a symbiotic relationship. So you are going to be spotlighted on the Under One Roof website, and it will be acknowledged that we're partners there. But it goes further than that. So for anyone who's interested in joining NYCRA as we go through what NYCRA is, then you will get a discounted membership, and it's an individual membership. So it's for your property, and you will have access to things like the Blue Moon lease in that case, and a lot of educational programming. In addition, we have a marketing partnership that we've agreed to with Freedom First. So not only will we send you things that we're doing, and so you can promote them on our behalf, which you have already done so well on social media, but it's reciprocal. So we, under the NYCRA umbrella, which we are now rolling out a Rochester chapter this year, we will be able to promote all of your marketing activities and encourage people to not only be members of NYCRA, but to also join your organization. In addition, we will have logo branding. So any events that we do run, and I will get to what we plan to do, hopefully in a post-COVID world, we will be able to brand you as a sponsor for that. So hopefully all of that is something that will enable us to thank you over the time for the donation. In addition, we certainly will be able to pledge speaking opportunities, such as what I'm doing today, to enrich the information directly to your group. One final thing that I would love to see this group do is, as we go through today, I'm going to share with you some of the ways we've been advertising to the public what Under One Roof is and trying to get the message out. One of those things was a video series where we did ask individuals to put together a video, and it's housed on our YouTube channel right now. I would love to see this group do one under your brand, so that way we can brand it and really have that cross marketing segment. So we can talk about that more as we go through, but I wanted to make mention first that we really do appreciate the opportunity to work with you. We're grateful for the donation, and we hope that this is something that we would be able to maintain even in a non-legislative year where we're focusing on fighting against laws that will affect all of us. So let's talk about what NYCRA is and what happened since last April and why this Under One Roof Coalition started. So for those of you who don't know, NYCRA is it's an acronym. It stands for the New York Capital Region Apartment Association. And it is an affiliate chapter of the National Apartment Association, which has representation across the United States. NYCRA was founded for the purpose of joining small and large owners of real estate for the mutual benefit. The organization is comprised of owners and managers of multifamily rental properties and other entities such as vendors who work in fields related to the housing industry. Through an organized program of information, project development, and educational seminars, the association is able to keep its members informed on all phases of the multifamily housing industry. The affiliate is, in its entirety, the NAA platform represents 5.2 million apartment homes, and it's able to bring the national resource and information and organization to the capital region. And this is the most widespread support in the entire apartment industry. So when I mentioned that NICRA is based in the capital region, that's where it originated. But as I made mention, this year there are territorial expansions that have been approved by the National Apartment Association. And so Rochester, Buffalo, and Syracuse did get chapters this year. And so we are actively seeking members out of those areas. And if you are interested in serving on a board or any committee that I may talk about, then just let me know. You can send me an email to jcain@Boylan Code, and I certainly will let you know. So when we were talking about last year, we, as the NICRA board, and I sit on the board, I've been a member for a couple of years now, we got wind that there was going to be sweeping changes to the RPAPL and the RPL, which are the two legal codes in New York State that govern everything from basically the application phase through the termination of a lease. And just about March, maybe April, so just about a year ago, we started getting rumblings that there was this movement taking place, and it was a very progressive left-wing movement started in Brooklyn, that we were going to get these changing, radical sweeping changes. Now, the timing of this is important because for the last 50 years or so prior to this, we have not had a Democratic Senate, a Democratic Assembly, and a Democratic governor. And why this was the perfect storm last year was that we also had the rent regulation laws, which previous to the changes in June only applied to the 5 boroughs in New York City, Westchester, Rockland, Nassau County. So those were set to expire on June 15th of 2019. And so you had this perfect storm where the legislator needed to do something, and they were basically being hounded and made to believe stories from the tenants. And I want to take that word, and I want to make sure we kind of define what I'm talking about when I say these tenant advocate groups. I do not mean the tenants that we house necessarily. I mean paid tenant advocates. They get a salary to rile up people and take buses and bring them up to Albany, and they picket and they scream and they yell, and they don't very much act professional. We have tenants that accompanied us who are part of our group, and we pride ourselves on the fact that they are professional. They are, their words and their voices are very meaningful to us. And so I just want to make sure when I say the word tenant advocates, that it's not the people that have been working with us. We very much want tenants to work with us. We want to educate the tenants to be in the best possible scenarios to make the best possible decisions. And we also want them to speak for the landlords and the property owners and the property managers that all of our under one roof makes up, because they're making their reassurance and their words have effects on the legislature to back up what we're saying. So I just wanted to make sure there's that distinction there. But we had gotten word that there were a series of assembly meetings that had taken place or were going to take place in late May and early June of last year. None of us got any kind of indication that this was happening. In fact, in Rochester, one of my persons that I work for in the manufactured home industry was the only Rochester landlord represented at this hearing in Rochester, and he was berated. In fact, his words to me were, "I didn't know I could do so many yoga poses in so many different ways." That's how harassing they were of me. So it is something that it took everybody by surprise. It wasn't something that I feel we weren't on the radar, didn't pay attention to. It just was a lot different than what was originally being spoken about. So in May, we made the decision at the board of NICRA that we needed to do something, and we needed to do something on behalf of the industry. So we hired Park Strategies as our lobbyist. Now, the cost of a lobbyist is not cheap. I can tell you that's why we need the funding. But we knew that we needed to do something, and the only way we were going to get the ears of the people in Albany was to actually have the lobbyists hired. So we hired them, and I actually went in to the meetings in late May before the passage of the laws, and I got to speak our piece, and I got to speak with many of the legislative officials. We actually were there the day after there was a huge paid tenant advocate movement, and they actually had crowd surfed the sergeant at arms who was in his late 70s because they were going crazy and screaming and yelling and pushing people. And most of the people that we spoke to were disgusted already at that point and said they didn't have an appetite for what the tenants unions were asking for, and they were just being too aggressive, and they were, demanding things. But what ended up happening is what, I fear every legislative session going forward is we got one bill that consisted, or one proposed piece of legislation that consisted of 9 proposed bills. And they put it all together and they made it into what's called an omnibus bill. And so when it came to a vote, basically the only choice was, yes, you're in favor of all 9 bills, or no, you're in favor of none of the bills. They couldn't pick, they couldn't choose. And most of these pieces of legislation had absolutely nothing to do with upstate New York. Most of it had to do with the rent control laws in New York City. So they wanted to make sure for people voting yes for this, that the rent regulations were still intact and would preserve past June 15th, because if they didn't vote yes on those bills, the system would have been basically dismantled, and that's a lot of problems it would have had for New York City, you can imagine. But most of the proposed bills were in terms of how much they could charge, whether or not they could do capital improvements and deduct them. So things that we just didn't have in place up here. However, the other 2 proposals that did affect us were what we got when the vote was in fact voted on, and it was the extension of the EPTA, so the Emergency Protection Tenant Act, which is a law that has been on the books since 1974, where a city or locale can opt in to rent control when a locale decides that there is a housing emergency, and that housing emergency is defined as a vacancy rate of 5% or less. And if in fact there is a housing emergency, then they can set a rent control provision in that locale. So that's what we got in Part G that affected upstate New York. That is something that none of the cities have yet to actually have be put into effect. Some cities, including Rochester, have begun the survey process to in fact see if there is a housing emergency. In a city, Kingston, which is, in the Hudson area, that city did in fact go through the entire process, and their survey found there was no housing emergency. The vacancy rate did not come out in the city's way. And so they ruled that they could not put rent control in that city. Some of the other cities are opting into that. I know Albany and like I said, Rochester, but none of the upstate cities have yet to be impacted by that section of what passed in June. The other thing we got was in Part M, and this is all housed under the umbrella of what passed in the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, or as we all call it, the HSTPA. Part M was the most widely spread sweeping piece of legislation in the last 50 years, again, to the RPL and the RPAPL. So when we took a look, and I got this law about midnight on the day it came out, well before most of you even knew it existed, I took a look at it. Now, mind you, I've been a landlord-tenant attorney, like I said, for over a decade, and this is what I live and breathe, and I knew those laws inside out. So I was able to quickly look at it and go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It just got worse as I turned the pages. And so every piece of the way we do business as landlords and property owners and real estate attorneys, it all drastically came to a change. And the worst part of this law was that it had an immediate effect. So by Monday, that we could not live with the laws that were being so we said, what can we do? There needs to be some amendment. The other real estate groups had gone ahead and they were filing TROs, and which is a temporary restraining notice and an injunction to try and stop the law. And they're in federal litigation as a constitutional taking claim. And we are definitely, you know, acknowledging that a federal lawsuit is an appropriate way to handle this. We support everybody who filed that. We hope that everybody who filed it will fight on our behalf to get those changed. But in the meantime, we recognize that litigation could take 5 years to figure out what the ruling on that was. So we continued with our lobbyists, and then we needed to coalesce the entire upstate region. At first, because the law was so distinguished between New York City and upstate, we really wanted to separate ourselves, and we really wanted to make it so that we were an upstate coalition. And so many of you did attend, and I appreciate everybody who did. We had our event at Turning Stone Casino on September 10th. And at that point, we were able to get 400 landlords, which is unheard of. And you guys are like herding cats. And I say that every time. It is so hard to get everybody in this industry to want to participate, because you guys are busy and you have jobs to do. And this is, you know, to take a day off of work, it usually doesn't exist. So we had 400 of you. We tried to figure out what it was that we wanted to try and amend, what the most important parts were, and how we were going to move forward. Coming out of Turning Stone, we still thought that we were going to be an upstate coalition, and we really thought that's what we were going to do. However, we just kept getting the waves of what we thought these tenant unions were doing, and it was scary in the sense that they were just definitely not going to give up. So what we started doing was doing a series of surveys. And again, many of you participated in this. And I know most of this is probably regurgitation of things you already know, but I just want to give you the context of where we are and where we're going. So the unintended consequences of the new laws, what we quickly figured out were these were hurting tenants. This was absolutely hurting all prospective tenants that were trying to get access to the housing, and it was hurting landlords who couldn't fill the units. It was hurting current tenants who might not be able to renew on the same basis that they were previously allowed to. And it was hurting neighborhoods. It was making neighborhoods unsafe. And the sheriffs and the marshals confirmed everything we were saying. I was supposed to be speaking at the sheriff convention in Albany, which would have been all the civil bureaus, so the sheriffs, the marshals, everybody. And unfortunately, that got postponed, but they looked to us to tell them how to do their jobs. There was a lot of people who did not know what was going on. I got asked by Judge Dorn to come in and train the judges in Rochester. And while I was flattered that he asked me, it's something that made me scared, because where were the county attorneys and why weren't they the ones training their own staff? Oops, sorry guys, I don't know what that was. So we went ahead and we did these surveys. We tried to figure out exactly the areas of where you were going to be harmed. We figured out that the apartment industry, we know it plays a vital role in economic development, but we started to see people selling property. We started to see the investors waiting and seeing on additional investments. I started to see people diversify their portfolios. I've never gotten so many inquiries about self-storage units in my life. I started to see you invest in other assets and, you know, again, reclass portfolios from multifamily into commercial. A lot of you got into strip malls, started looking into that. A lot of you just said, I'm out of here. And then there was the use of 1031 DST exchanges, which Jeff Garcia at Capital Spectrum, or Spectrum Financial, sorry, he had came in at the right time and it introduced me to what that was. And that was a way to sell your shares or do a 1031, take your shares out of the proceeds in your New York property and reinvest them in a different state, maybe in a different area or class of property. So there were immediate consequences to this. And those consequences continue. In a COVID-19 world, those consequences are heightened for some of you, even more so than they already were. What scared us is that landlords were not able to complete due diligence. Not being able to use prior eviction history and the court records wasn't as offensive as when you dove deep and you started to see what it actually meant. And what it actually meant was that you couldn't use your references from other landlords anymore. You basically were cut off from knowing what the tenant had done in that property, what kind of tenant they were, did they cause damage, did they not pay on time. And these are things, this is your property. So we were very upset with that. And by severely limiting the property owner from key information regarding potential renters and the leasing history in the application process, the property manager is unable to make sound decisions on whether the applicant can pay the rent, as well as if that applicant could be a danger to themselves, to others, the property, or the neighborhood at large. I would like to know if there's any correlation between the screening process that you're able to do now and the fact that some people can't pay the rent. Because it may be that we see that there is a correlation between this section where we see that had you been able to screen better, had you been able to know that there was a tenant who didn't pay all along, maybe in a COVID-19 world, it wouldn't hurt so hard. So I think there's ramifications of the HSTPA that are going to weigh heavily on this COVID issue. In addition, what we saw the new laws do was this unsustainable eviction process. So as you know, before the HSTPA, it used to be that you could start an eviction and complete an eviction in the same month, roughly 21 to 28 days. And that would be in every court pretty much. Now, some outlying courts may not have regular court parts. Yeah, they were always going to be a little bit delayed, but nothing like we're seeing now. And obviously we are in a moratorium at the moment, but before this, we were seeing upwards of 120 days anyway before people were getting into court. This is causing severe financial hardship for small business landlords, and we recognize that. So what do? In probably January or so, I myself drafted legislation amendments to the HSTPA. We took all of your suggested survey data. We spoke to many of you. My task force, we put task force in every city. My task force in Rochester, I couldn't ask for a more aggressive and better task force than I've got here. I mean, it's blowing things out of the park with the ideas that you guys have and the will to keep fighting. And it's certainly helped my job in this coalition leader role. But we sought to address what the court and the sheriffs were figuring out were the problems. And we recognized that we needed to do that as a statewide coalition. And so we created Under One Roof. We did hire Gramercy Public Relations Company out of Albany. We were able to brand the Under One Roof logo. And it was something that we wanted to do specifically where we made mention of all the people that were part of this coalition, specifically the tenants, because we wanted to make sure that from the moment we started this, we had compassion for tenants. I never wanted to be a group that cut off the hand that was feeding you. Everybody had to recognize that this is a symbiotic relationship. There's a landlord who has a building to rent, and then there's a tenant that has to rent it for a landlord to be profitable. And I wanted to keep that message close to my heart. And so having that hashtag of compassion for tenants, having that hashtag of fight the right fight from the very start was very important to me because number one, I knew I was going to be scrutinized on all social media, and I wanted to make sure that my messaging was consistent. And number two, I wanted to encourage tenants who are not part of this paid tenant advocacy group to join us, to be educated. And in this COVID-19 world, it is even more important that they are joining us versus this nonsense going on in part of the state, foolish and so harmful to tenants if they listen to that nonsense right now. I think what's going on with the internet? That it's dangerous. So, and I hope that didn't cut out, but for some reason I'm getting an unstable or messaging. So again, we found out that we needed to join this coalition. We created it statewide. a lot of affiliate chapters of other organizations, landlord groups, chambers of commerce. You guys started finding us, and it was awesome. And, you know, it was kudos to the event at Turning Stone. And then in January, on January 13th, we held a lobby day where 200 landlords went ahead and came to Albany. I have to give props to the Rochester bus that Matt Droon was able to get everybody on. I think it was very important that Rochester was very well represented, and here's why. Every single time that I went into Albany from last year, and still hear it now when I go in there, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a registered lobbyist right now. So I'm the lobbyist for the NYCRA group, along with my coalition leader, Deb Huzater, and president of NYCRA. And together, we go into Albany now almost, you know, sometimes bi-weekly, and we consistently hear, well, this is all because of Rochester. And it breaks my heart to have worked here for as long as I have. And I'm not from here. I'm from Long Island, and I don't live here. I live in Buffalo. But it's very dear to my heart when I hear them, you know, quote unquote, attack our city. And so it is even more important to me how much Rochester has been involved, how much you've fought back against that stereotype, and how you've proven that we are not unscrupulous landlords. And so that's, you know, that's where the passion comes from. That's where the firepower comes from for me. It's territorial. I like to get territorial and protect my own. And that's what you guys are. You're my own. And so it is something that I think the more we see Rochester involved, the better. So again, with the adversely affecting certain groups of people, the inability applicants on the score increases went up immediately after June. Rent to income ratios went up. What they did was they forced the landlord's hand to become more specific in the criteria, and you would rather hold out your unit than fill it with somebody who might be on that bubble, who might not be a good candidate. And so what we started to see was that this was a disproportionate effect on certain groups of people. So seniors and students, first-time renters, foreign nationals, they are having a tougher time finding housing because of this. When I talk to some of my friends in New York City who are now part of our coalition, who are, you know, brokers who rent to tenants, what I hear from them is tenants who they represent are sleeping on couches, surfing couches basically, because they go to school at NYU or Columbia, and they may be from China or India, and they can't get housing because a landlord won't take them unless they have a 50-to-1 income ratio, or their parents have a position. That guarantee doesn't mean anything unless they live in New York State. Even if you live out of the state, if you go to sue someone, it's a hassle. So they're not getting anything in terms of availability. Seniors, they're not getting that income to rent ratio. Many are living on fixed income, and maybe they just sold their house and they have a whole load of cash sitting in their bank account, but that account can be here today, gone tomorrow. So there's this overwhelming effect that it's having on certain groups of people. And so we need to protect those people. That's what my job, that's what my responsibility is in the amendment process. In addition, we need to modify other existing time periods that are hurting everybody. The move out process, and now we're seeing it affect COVID-19, having to be able to do a move out inspection 2 to 1 weeks before they move out is ridiculous when you think about the fact that a landlord is not supposed to be in there with personal possessions. And so you're not able to tell what's owed, or what's damaged. You're not able to tell if the rug, if they move the furniture, is hiding certain things that are damaged. You're not able to tell necessarily when the animal has been removed, if there's, you know, odor smells and scratches and things like that. So it's not a good situation. And now in a COVID-19 world, we're in a situation where even if you're deemed essential, are you supposed to be going to do those things? So this industry is reeling, not only because of COVID-19, but because of the things that were set up in June that were just irresponsible and need some clarity. And we just spoke about it today, amendments right now where we can help smooth this process out because of the unintended consequences of the HSTPA. So the formation of Under One Roof, basically the mission statement of Under One Roof has become that we are a New York statewide coalition. We support New Yorkers living in rental apartments and those who own and operate them. The coalition works to protect New Yorkers' access to quality housing, increase the economic impact of rental properties, and foster growth in the rental housing industry statewide. Together, we're invested in improving the apartment industry for all. Anyone who is wondering, who does not know about Under One Roof, the internet email address for the coalition site is underoneroofny.org. I do suggest everybody go on and look at what we've done to date. Our strategy going forward, and how do we help investors going forward here? We knew that at a certain point that we needed to work with the downstate region, that we couldn't alienate ourselves because they have for years been lobbying on behalf of themselves against rent regulations and things of that nature. We were novices to this. Deb and I are not paid to do what we're doing. Like I said, I'm an attorney in the industry. Deb is an owner in the industry. We both serve on the board of NYCRA, but NYCRA had never had this legislative wing of it. There's an advocacy role that one of our members has played on a national level, but nothing to the extent of advocacy in the state of New York that was ever more than one person going into Albany and saying a couple words. So we recognized, number one, we had to create a legislative committee for NYCRA. And so I chair that committee. And one of the reasons I chose to chair it is because I am a lawyer and I am able to, read statutes and understand what they're saying and understand how to change bill language. And because I'm a practitioner in this area who's practiced it for so long, and many of you know I represented some of the biggest landlord and property management groups in not only Rochester, but in the state. What it's done for me is an innate ability to give the judges some education in terms of the differences. So one of the first things I did, which I know got circulated all over the state, was a chart of just where was the law and then what were the changes, but what was the practical impact of those changes? And if anybody needs that, I'm an attorney who, probably should be a little bit close to what I give out, but I feel that we should work together. And, attorneys, are they out to give proprietary information? Sometimes, sure. But unless we all work together, unless attorneys work together, unless judges work together, unless industry partners work together, we're not going to be able to change the way that we operate in the state of New York. What I would like to see us get to is a situation where there is a form approved lease where we can rely on, this is a lease, it's a landlord's, also lease where landlords have input as to the context of the paragraph and the covenants, and that we can know and rest assured that there are forms that are acceptable that a judge can't rule on and say, nope, not going to give you this. Because it's very frustrating, as many of you know, to walk into a court and have a housing part like Rochester does, where one day one judge will do something and the next they're making laws off the bench. And that gets really confusing and really harmful when you're trying to keep paperwork consistent and know that, today how I draft my papers is going to be accepted and not, tomorrow it's going to be ruled as not sufficient and thrown out and I've got to start the process over. So I want to get us to a situation where we are formed, our forms are all across the board coherent, and that'll help, I think, the industry. The other thing we've been trying to push for is one housing part court judge in the city of Rochester, much like Syracuse, much like Buffalo, which work very well, where one judge is consistently hearing the parts. So that's also an active part of the advocacy efforts that Under One Roof is taking on. And so we're doing things at the state level, but then we have these task force in the local level, and we're asking those task force to work with the mayor and city council and lower level officials who can have influence on what happens in Albany. So even though it's not necessarily a Rochester issue per se, where the mayor can decide, oh, this part of the HSTPA is no good, she can influence a Harry Bronson. We need that influence. We need people to say, the people of this city are not functioning because of these laws. And we need the grassroots movement of the people, but we also need the buy-in from officials at the local levels to influence those at the higher levels in Albany, and even at the federal government now, where we can say, we need your help. This is a New York issue. This is not just a city issue, and everybody should buy into this. So that those task forces have been helping us greatly. In addition, we've been working with our downstate NAA affiliate. So that is an organization called CHIP. It's the Community Housing Improvement. And so if you look them up, they are just the downstate version of NYCRA. And so we are following with them the lawsuit, and you know, at some point there may be more lawsuits that come up from the constitutional challenges, especially if we get something passed in this COVID-19. We will be joining and we will be partnering with them. Other organizations such as, you know, REBNY and RSA, CHIP, as I mentioned, the Builders Associations of Long Island and Westchester, we're all working together to collectively have a voice at this point, and seeing what they're doing and seeing what we're doing, and making sure that when we target these laws now, we are having collective memorandums in opposition to these laws, that we're trying to be a force of the entire industry to say, no, you know, we are not going to go with what this proposal is, and here's why. And the messaging here is in that messaging. There's a small, just got started in the Buffalo area. That's a Western New York group. That has nothing to do with Rochester or Syracuse or Albany or the Hudson Valley, the Southern Tier, the North Country. So really the voice of all those people lies in under one roof. And so I just want to make you understand how far reaching our messaging has been. So that's our strategy in terms of going forward. Now, this legislative session, we knew that we could not allow what happened last session to happen again. We knew that we needed to get ahead of the game and figure out what this year's proposals were going to look like and get in front of it and start advocating immediately. As you all know, the Good Cause Eviction Bill, which is Senate Bill 2892A, which is sponsored by Julia Salazar in the Senate, and she is a young, progressive, left-wing senator out of Brooklyn. Her proposal was that there be no evictions without cause. And so landlords would lose the ability to terminate leases at the end of a natural termination of a lease without cause. And so it would take the ability for you, who might have waited till the end of the lease to non-renew a tenant who you just couldn't deal with, but didn't want to take into a Rochester City Court on a hearing situation. And it would not allow you going forward now to be able to have a say in that process. You would have to renew, meaning that that lease would be annually renewed perpetually, enumerated in the text of the statute. But let me give you a real-time serious problem with that. One of the proposals was that you would have to have a judge decide whether or not the capital improvement you wanted to make on a unit was worthy of taking it offline. And the scary part of that is kind of what I just alluded to. Whenever you have judicial discretion, where a judge can decide whether or not what you want to do rises to a level of their satisfaction for you to be able to do it, we've got a problem. That is a constitutional taking 101. That is something that, depending on who the judge is on the given day, that is something you are being handicapped to not be able to take that unit offline. And what will eventually happen is the decay of that unit. You might go 15 years without being able to do any capital improvement. And then when that tenant leaves finally, you're not going to be able to go in there and do a touch or do a paint, overhaul, or maybe replace the carpet. We're going to be talking about major improvements to bring that unit up to the level where you can charge the rents that are the current rents for that unit. And so it's going to be something that's going to be a disaster. And so we can't allow this law to pass. In addition, there is a universal rent control mechanism to this, where rents would be no longer able to be increased more than 3% or 3%. And so while that may not seem horrible for people, I want to tell you the facts of what we found out. So in New York City, for instance, they operate where 7 to 10% is on the very low end of where they would be able to raise rents and cover all their operating costs. So you're not just talking about a rent increase, because property taxes go up every year, and your operating costs, like your payroll, those raises go up, and the payroll costs and insurance costs, they go up, and water and sewer go up. And so you might have repairs, you have capital improvements. And so this would be something that 3% would never in a million years cover it. What it would do would surely make sure that you increase your rent every year, which most of us don't do up here from what I see from leases. But it would be an unsustainable market dollar amount that we're seeing. And so this is something that's very scary and that we needed to come collectively against. And so that's where we started advocating to see, did this have any legs? Is this going anywhere? Now, I also wanted to make mention that I did speak with the tenant advocate group. So Housing Justice for All, if you're not following them on Twitter, I would suggest that anybody who's interested in this fight join and follow them. It is eye-opening what you see on those sites. And as you all know, on April 1st, they actually put together a toolkit for how to complete a rent strike, how to put a rent demand notice to your landlord to say, I'm not paying rent and I demand that it be suspended, how to put up notices all over the property to not make rent due. And in this process, they caused a series of misinformation to get out on the internet where rent was not owed. And one of the largest concerns, one of the interviews I just did with the Washington Post was, my biggest concern is the like this and the effect on it, whether it has people paying April rent. Because I'm very concerned that people don't think rent's even due. And I know this to be true because I speak to landlords and I have them tell me that their tenants say it's not owed, you can't collect it. And that's absolutely not the truth. There is no rent forgiveness program in the state of New York right now. There are proposals, but nothing has been forgiven. And so these tenants who are being misled down these roads, they're being very much harmed. And I'm very nervous that we're going to see people evicted at the end of this moratorium who relied on messaging like this and were fooled. So I sat down with one of the coalition leaders for the Housing Justice for All citizen campaign. And I met her in Dunkin' Donuts in Albany. She was rudely 45 minutes late, didn't seem to care, got herself a juice and waited online for another 5 minutes when she finally joined me. But I wasn't, I didn't show anger. I'm not that kind of person. I, rolled with it. And it was important to me to see what she had to say. And she sat down and I immediately said, can we agree to that housing is important here? And her message was no, because housing is a fundamental right. And I said, okay, moving on. Let's continue to go with this conversation. And we talked about a lot of, why it is that she thinks that good cause is necessary. And at the end of the conversation, her biggest messaging to me was eventually they want everything to go to a public housing situation where tenants would be able to have cooperative models where they would actually own a limited share of that building. And so, I could not agree with that model, obviously, because that would put all small business landlords out of business. And I don't think that that's good for tenants. If anybody looks at the NYCHA housing model in New York City, which is the public housing model, you will see that it has a host of problems. In fact, a couple of months ago, they went many days without heat and hot water. And so it is something that I think is irresponsible, and they are promoting it. In fact, we had another conversation about the safety of the buildings. And one of my biggest concerns, again, is not being able to vet who's in the building. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself to people who've already heard me tell the story, but I think the messaging is important enough to repeat it. I asked her a question of what happens, God forbid, if there is a sex offender in the building, and God forbid you leave your children, which she had disclosed to me she had, if you leave your children to go to work or to the grocery store or run an errand, and God forbid the worst happens to those children and they are scarred for life, what do you do with that person? What do we do in terms of getting that person out of the unit? So not only would they not harm anybody else, but they'd be removed for what they did to your children. And she looked at me and she smiled, and her words were, if you take away the housing, you break that person. And her whole point was, you need to rehabilitate that person. You need to socially improve them through, her devices were therapy and support, and you don't remove them from the house. And so, at the end of the day, the radical differences of their group and our group, while I tried my hardest to wrap my head around, we worked on things and work together to improve everything for tenant choices and to preserve small business landlords, it's just not possible. And they really just are a group that wants to fight. And I was just before this COVID-19, in fact, I was a little worried that I was in the Capitol on the Monday before they shut down the whole Albany the next week. So just a week removed, I was up there, and I met with two of the Capitol District Assembly persons, and they told me that they had a 9-month pregnant aide that works with one of them that was cornered and screamed at by these tenant advocates because they stormed, much like they did on our lobby day. They had actually started storming upstairs in the actual offices and in the hallways, and they did that to a 9-month pregnant woman. And so the Capitol Police actually had to arrest these people. And she just said the extreme nature by which they were acting was something now that she'll never forgive. She'll never, ever allow them to influence her decisions. And so that's the one thing with Under One Roof that I want to make mention. It's a professional organization. It's made up of business men and women. It's made up of industry partners. It's made up of tenants who are, good tenants who we want to make sure we keep in the units. And so I know everybody's getting frustrated. I know everybody wants us to, rile up and write letters and keep momentum. I just want to make sure that everybody understands we want the same thing, but we want to do it collectively with purpose and in one uniform voice so that the messaging is as strong as we can make it. Part of this mission that we've done, and I know it's coming up on 8, so I'm going to answer questions in a minute, but part of what we've done is this video messaging platform. And so we created an Under One Roof New York channel on YouTube, and we asked so many of you across the state to do a video and film yourself of if rent is not paid, what would happen to you? And so that video's up. That has hit about 2,600 people. Our lobbyists this morning had a meeting with the chief Capitol staff for, I believe it was the governor's office. If not, it was the, and she was able to show this video while she was in there and convey our messaging with your voices and your faces and the diversity and the distinction of where you guys are and what you're doing, and standing beside your spouse, saying that it's a family business. This is an overpowering message that we can use. And so this is what I need from your group. I need you guys to participate. I need you guys to send videos. I need you collectively, if you can do it at Freedom First, and what a great platform to showcase your group. We need videos. We need to know the impact of what COVID-19's done, what the HSTPA has done to rents being paid, to having to lay off people, to your inability to know who's in your buildings and the safety of that as a concern. Because we can't stop this fight. If we let down our guard, we're going to see other laws pass. And that's going to be devastating to this industry. I'm going to conclude my little portion here by saying there are a couple proposals right now under COVID-19. Senate Bill 8125, which we do believe for all intents and purposes is dead, but that would extend out a rent suspension 90 days and give reprieve for the landlords as an offset on the mortgage. But if you don't have a mortgage and it's not completely making you whole, or it doesn't include operating costs and it doesn't give you cash flow, we don't believe this law is going to pass. We don't believe it has any legs to pass. But that's one of the proposals that Under One Roof did issue an opposition memo to Albany, and we went around and we spoke to everybody while we could personally, as well as then virtually. I know right after They shut down in Albany. We had a meeting with Senator Kennedy out of Buffalo about it. So we are actively still doing advocacy efforts on your behalf, even though we're not fighting against good cause right now because the session's done. Now, 8139, 8140A, those are two proposals where you would get vouchers. I know most of you have, heard my live. I do have a chart that I will make sure everyone in this group has in case you're not watching my Facebook Lives, which kind of delineate the differences between the voucher program. We are thinking about getting behind 8140A as amended, and it's to be amended by us drafting that. So I am going to be, again, one of the key drafters of the amendments to add things like including property tax offsets, including sewer water, making sure that you have some form of cash flow so the voucher goes directly to the landlord. And we're making sure we advocate on that on your behalf as well. There is also one other proposal that would be to make sure that at the end of the state of emergency that there would be a 6-month time period where you cannot bring evictions. This is not even a bill yet. We don't have a bill number. It's a bill proposal, but rest assured, Under One Roof is on top of this. We are, again, having these phone calls weekly with our industry partners, and we are making sure that we're ahead of the game. And any information, I certainly share every day, 2 o'clock. I do a Facebook Live on Boylan Code's website that any one of you are free to join, as well as when we get back in a post-COVID world, I do roundtables monthly that certainly will update everybody. So let me take some questions. Hopefully we'll take questions for, about a half hour. I'm glad to answer anything. And then if something that I mentioned, there's a document or something afterwards that you are like, oh, I wish I asked her, either, email me directly or jump on Facebook Live tomorrow. And I'd be glad to try and answer anything. But I so much appreciate every one of you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight, to educate some members who may not have ever seen me before, but this is just our messaging and what we need to keep getting out to make sure everybody is actively involved. So let me see here how I do this.
Jamie, it's Andy. Just real quick, I've got one question that was asked in the chat room. Are month-to-month leases affected by the good cause eviction rule? And that was from Mark Finewood.
Yeah, so there basically wouldn't be anything called a month-to-month lease. What they would do is it's a lease that continues to go. So you could not any longer under, the RPL section 232, even as amended right now, you could not do that. It would just be consistent leases that unless you had good cause, you could not get out from under.
Okay, and then I'm going to open this up so people can
let's see.
unmute.
What is okay?
And bam. All right, everybody, if you want to ask a question, just try and be polite. You can unmute yourself now and start.
So I'm seeing what does NYCRA stand for. So NYCRA stands for the New York Capital Region Apartment Association. But don't get fooled by that acronym. It's not a New York Capital Region group anymore. We are statewide. And again, we did roll out chapters in Rochester, Buffalo, and Syracuse. And we are looking to add additional chapters to like the Southern Tier and the Hudson Valley, Orange County, and the like. Okay, let's see. What is the Facebook site? So the Facebook site, if you go on Boylan Code on Facebook, you just type that in. Boylan Code actually has a Facebook page, and every day at 2 o'clock, if you like our page, you'll be able to get a notification that I've gone live. And we are on there probably about, I would say on minimum about 30 minutes, maximum about an hour. And it's a news update of the day. I've started doing these since 3 weeks ago when we were basically sent home as non-essential workers. And so it's a way for me to connect with all of you in the industry, to give you live updates of what's going on daily, whether it be in the real estate world for agents, brokers, property managers, you know, the like. So we do updates as they relate from NYSCAR and NYSAR. We talk about essential worker changes. We've like any kind of fair housing rules that are changing, or COVID-19 policies that I want to make sure you guys are aware of. We provide resources for you. So there's documents that I share. We shared a host of payment arrangements, confessions of judgment, surrender agreements. I did a maintenance policy where you want to make sure that your maintenance staff is going ahead and asking certain questions before they enter units in case someone's positive. We're getting questions if someone's a COVID positive, what do you do with the unit? So just various things on a daily basis that might be of use to anybody. So if you're interested, you can jump on that. What is the correct law now for rent concerning COVID-19? So as we sit here at 8 o'clock on April 9th, rent is still a contractual obligation that is owed. No one has been forgiven of any rent. So, you know, if they have a situation where your tenant's coming to you and they're telling you they've been laid off or furloughed or their hours have been reduced, we do encourage landlords to work with those tenants to create payment arrangements based on factual information where that person can substantiate that those situations exist. So people are asking, like, can I ask for documentation? Absolutely. You can go ahead and you can create a policy, and I'm telling everybody, create short-term policies for COVID-19. So in this situation, it would be, you know, the payment plan arrangement. And so you would set forth what the criteria is for the documentation you're looking for. So if someone's telling you they've been laid off, perhaps it's the unemployment document from their employer telling them they've been laid off, or them applying for unemployment. Or if they've had hours reduction, being able to show you, you know, from their employer what the hours that they've been reduced and what the impact that has on their ability to pay rent. However, people who have filed unemployment, not only are they potentially making more money now, but there should be, once we see these monies get paid out, there should be hopefully no reason why they're not paying you the rent. That plus the stimulus checks, there should be no problem. What I'm looking for is statistical data that goes supports that some messaging has misrepresented that rent has not, or rent has been forgiven and is not owed, and what the proportionate amount of people who are not paying you, how many of those have come to you with a request for some kind of payment plan, because those numbers are okay. What I'm worried about is the percentage of people who just don't talk to you, but then don't pay the rent. And do those people actually have a legitimate reason for not paying your rent? Or is it they're just not paying because, one, they don't think they need to, or two, they're just not going to? And that data, eventually, I'm gonna wanna know, of that percentage, how many of them do you actually have to evict in the long run? And how much of a cost increase is that to you to evict people who just outright blew you off? So, you know, that's the data I'm going to be paying attention to, because that's the data that I think these paid tenant advocates are pushing. Carl, mention the NAA call to action correspondence and get that link on the FREIA site. Yes. So there is currently a call to action on the NAA website. I will make sure I send all this information over to you guys. Right now you can go on the NAA website, which is the National Apartment Association, and you can put in your information and you can reach your the actual federal senator and assembly persons. And so, or the House and the Senate. If you were somebody who worked in one state and lived in another, it actually would reach your business and your residential area for the representatives who represent you. And what NAA is asking on a United States worldwide level is that they go ahead and they revise the CARES package that just came out, and things like the exception to passive business, where landlords were excluded from being able to apply to the PPP loan unless you have a property management group of 500 or less. Fix those discrepancies so that there's more protection for the multifamily industry. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Leanne's saying much of that's on there, so that's great. Anybody else have any more questions?
All right, Jamie, I'm on the Facebook Live at the same time, and we have a question from Scott Spear. It says, I know it's a whole different subject. Can you talk about the Small Business Administration disaster loan? Can landlords without employees or 1099 workers get it, and how can we increase our chances to get it?
I didn't pull any of my materials, so I don't want to misquote on that. What I will tell you is that landlords are eligible for that loan. And as part of that loan, there is a $10,000 advance that can be forgiven. What the difference with that loan is from the PPP loan is that loan is a forbearance loan. I will do this. For that gentleman asking and for everybody else in the group, we did create a check, like a master chart that goes through the PPP loan as compared to the EDIL loan, and I will circulate that. So the 1099 is a tricky one. With the PPP loan, the 1099 contractors are being told that they should apply for their own companies under that loan. So the EDIL, I think is a little bit different on that, but that's a whole nother topic and conversation, but the chart will definitely help. So I'll get that over to you immediately. I'm sorry I didn't pull that today.
All right, and everybody, you can unmute yourself to ask questions. Feel free to do so.
Are we on?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, so Jamie, I had a tenant that had money to pay the rent and said she was told that she did not have to. I said, where'd you have that from? She goes, CNN. Of course.
What? Okay, so, you know, some of this is rent moratorium, or I shouldn't say that, eviction moratorium. Some people are just not understanding that does not mean rent is due and owing. They actually asked the governor recently if he would outright say rent is still owing because of this problem. And so, you know, that is the messaging. So when I'm seeing now companies, I just saw one of my friends in New York City, I asked to see a letter to see what are property management groups saying. Most of them are underlining rent is still due and owing, because this is the problem. I think there's going to be people who just do not pay because they don't think they have to. And to rely on sources like CNN, number one, they're not even speaking in New York law specifically. What's happening in New York is totally different what's happening in California, and then it's happening in some state that doesn't even have an eviction moratorium in it. So I'm curious to know, did the tenant end up paying you, or did they stand by that?
Funny. So the follow-up is, no, you need to pay rent. Listen to your governor. And she goes upstairs, goes, let me see what I got. She comes down and pays $60. Yeah, okay.
See, what's going to happen is there are going to be tenants who ultimately get evicted because of that. Because, you know, either they don't pay because they can't pay, and then they should be talking to you about some kind of arrangement with you, or they don't pay, but they can pay, and then they use that money for some other purpose. And when the eviction moratorium's over, they are gotten themselves into such a hole that then they won't be able to pay. And then you're going to get evicted.
I want to,
you've spent the money elsewhere. And that's what we're afraid of stimulus.
I want to gauge Pat Gallagher. He's got, what, 700 units, 600 units. Let me tell you what's happening with what happened here between April 1 and April 9. I have about 20% of tenants who have called in to be responsible. Here's my plan. Here's the issue. That's what we want, right? Communication.
Sure.
And for the most part, it's working out pretty well. So Pat, you have the bigger number. And by the way, Jamie, when people give stats for percentages, ask them to also identify number of units. It really has an impact.
Sure.
100% of a 4-unit property is different from 100% of a 160-unit property, right?
Very true.
So
Yes.
Pat, you got the largest numbers. What's been your response to date?
We're at about 67% collected, 68%.
What's your normal rate of collection?
Probably 75, 80 right now.
Okay, so not a huge drop off. Do you anticipate that going up in May and June?
Well, that's when all the extra money is coming. So, and we're out of 700 units, we're about 500 plus really low income. So a lot of them have the DSS and Section 8. And
that helps.
Yeah, we've done a few emails and YouTube, and we've been in touch with our people, and we're not getting a lot of pushback. Just a normal people who are late to take 3 weeks out of the month to pay. So we're a little bit less right now, but knock on wood, it's not so bad yet.
Sure.
And
what I see is actually the lower income affordable housing are kind of got that safety net because of the resources like Section 8. What I'm seeing hard hit are the luxury rentals, where you may have business people or real estate brokers or independent contractors or people who run their own business like a store or a restaurant who make good money, who simply can't function or can't operate right now or have been laid off. And so can't pay their rent. So it's not even like some people want to make this about income divide. It's actually converse in what I'm seeing in rent ability to pay in certain areas.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I understand the 90-day no evictions, but would you suggest that around day 76 per se, you can send the 14-day, or do we have to wait till day 91 to send the 14-day?
So a couple things here. One, it depends on the mortgage that you have on the property. So if you have a federal backed mortgage, so if you have a Freddie or a Fannie Mae loan on that property, or it's with HUD or Farmers Bureau or anything that's federally backed, you need to make sure, first of all, even a conventional loan isn't backed by a Freddie and Fannie. And again, these are resources we gave on Boylan's site that I can send over to make sure they're on your site as well. And you can check the status of that to see if in fact it is a federally backed mortgage. If it's a federally backed mortgage, you are in a scenario where it's a 120-day moratorium on evictions. So that 90-day doesn't apply in that situation. So I just want to make sure that that is a distinction. The other thing is, in that 120 days, you can't charge late fees and you can't serve any notices. And what the problem is that the way that the CARES Act wrote that, it says after the 120 days, you have to wait an additional 30 days to serve notices. Now, this 120-day moratorium only applies to non-payment of rent, but that 30-day notice applies to terminations and notices in general. And so what the problem is, without clarity and cleanup on that law, is I foresee that eventually a judge is going to rule that any potential eviction taken in to court post that 120 could be arguably based on non-payment, even though you may be coming into court and saying it's a holdover, the lease terms ended, or it's a breach of a violation of lease. They're going to ask, is rent owed? And at that point, I think they're going to put you in a scenario where you can't do anything within that 120 days. As it relates to the conventional loans that do not have federally backed mortgages, that 90-day moratorium on evictions, they are silent as to the 14-day notice and the 5-day notice service. What I have surmised all along is you wouldn't be able to do it. Number one, doing it now is pretty much foolish waste of money, because you're going to have to do it as you get sooner, because the courts are absolutely going to rule that it's premature, or that during this state of emergency that people aren't answering their doors. So I even think we're going to start to see some orders to show cause from tenants and savvy lawyers that go ahead and assert service of process wasn't done in the manner in which you were diligently trying to get somebody because you knew they weren't going to answer the door. So everything's going to be nail and mail. And I think there's an argument there of, well, I'm not going to pick up certified mails, so I never even got served with a 5-day notice. When we all know that 99% of people aren't even picking it up when it's not a COVID world. But I think that there's going to be some litigation around that. We reached out to Judge Doran a couple days ago to ask this clarity question on, can you serve notices during the 90-day moratorium? Now, he responded to my associate who asked and said, I'm not telling one attorney yes or no. But he did direct us to the governor's second amendment of the guidance on this issue, which basically states there's an eviction moratorium on 90 days. And so he gave us that as the answer to point us in that direction, where the wording is nothing shall exist in the 90 days. My guess is that reading between the lines, nobody should be serving anything in the 90 days. Now, as we get further clarity of how we're going to come out of this and what the court's intention is on how they're going to open up the courts for eviction again, we'll get some clarity on that point. At a certain point, they're going to have to direct when notices can be served and how we go forward if they were, notices of non-renewal were served during the time period. Are they valid? This, so you know, this is only applicable to actions that were not yet commenced. If you had an action commenced before the COVID time period that just didn't get heard by a court or entertained by the sheriff to remove, that should not apply here. It should be when the court opens, you just get a new time frame. I'm hoping that they don't make you reserve that. But to give an answer to you, I'm babbling around it. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is because no one's given us clarity. The court hasn't, the judges haven't, the governor's office certainly hasn't. I think it's a wait and see. You know that I'm following it. As soon as I get some indication, I'm going to tell my clients probably close to, end of May, start sending me referrals, knowing that I'm going to have to update, but anticipating that I'm going to get a deluge of files that are referred to our office for eviction for many, many months. And at least we know the backlog is there and I can input the data and get your petition ready. And if we have to mess with the numbers before we file, fine. But I want to be ready to go the day they say go, because you can rest assured every attorney in the city of Rochester is going to be filing mass amounts of evictions on that behalf of clients, and it's kind of going to be first serve of who gets in there to file them first. So stay tuned on that answer. Anything I hear, and I'm, luckily because of my lobbying connections, I generally hear things before every other person in the area. I get calls at midnight like, hey, this is what's coming down tomorrow. So hopefully I can be a resource that really quickly is able to tell you guys what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
So Jamie, as you probably know, all those cases that were deferred from February and March, we're getting notices of adjournments in May, right?
Correct. They're going to get adjourned again.
So, that was my question.
Absolutely. The earliest by which a court could potentially even hear it, and that's assuming no further extensions or timeframes to get everything ready to go. And again, I surmise it's going to be on the 90th day, they're going to tell you you have to wait an additional 30. That's my gut. And then the earliest by which anything could potentially be heard would be June 20th. And that's, again, for conventional mortgages that do not have a federal mortgage situation. In a federal mortgage situation, the earliest by which it could be heard would be the end of July.
But the question is the definition of evict. See, the moratorium is to evict, not to commence or proceed, but to evict.
Right.
That's up in the air, right? So
that's up in the air until the court reopens for the purposes of filing evictions, and they're not, or even adjourning dates out. Now, I would guess, and this is just based on what the court's doing virtually, I would guess those in the queue are going to get first preference. So if you already filed a case that had an assigned index number that was supposed to be heard but got adjourned because the court closed, my guess is those get heard first.
Another question. this is unprecedented. So we need to have unprecedented response from the courts, right? So the city court, can you at least communicate with them to find out, to get some guidance as to what we can and cannot do?
Yeah, so we've tried. We were told, I'm not going to tell one attorney. When the governor decides, the governor decides. So it's not going to just be Rochester City Court. It's going to be the entire state of New York is going to be guided on how this gets handled. If it were up to me, I would put 6 judges on the bench for eviction court every day of the week and cure the backlog. But I don't make the laws in this area. But that's, these are the suggestions we're going to come up with to cure the backlog, because you will have been waiting, in some circumstances, 6 months to get rent if you previously had, files that had 3 months of rent owed. And that's, again, assuming we end this at 90 days. We have no idea if, we're going to be able to go out and have these things heard. I would like to see the court move into a virtual court for evictions. The problem is that they are very concerned with people becoming homeless and wandering and moving spots when you're not supposed to be out, other than going to essential work. So it's going to depend on the timing of when this crisis ends, and it's going to depend on the governor to give the state a directive on this. It'll be an actual executive order we get detailing from him what we can do in each locale. And then, yes, I will let everyone know.
Jaime, can you hear me?
Sure, yeah.
I just have a quick question. I know that we're talking day 90 and we have to wait until day 91 to start serving any 14-day notices, assuming that actually is best case scenario, which it sounds like it's probably going to be pushed even further. When, so that I put it on my calendar with a big star, when is day 91?
June 21st. Okay. And I'm not sure if that's a Saturday or Sunday, but that number is June 21st.
So that's the absolute first day that I can give any of my tenants a notice of non-payment, 14-day notice.
So we don't know that yet because they haven't told us that. So, what's on my calendar is at the end of May to really start pressing for an answer. And again, this collaborative group, because we have lobbyists from all different areas, we're peppering this question. We're forcing this on the assembly persons. We're actually putting in bill potential language for you right now to get clarity on things like use of the double security deposit that came up today, and things like accepting advances of rent so that we can get you the rent paid in advance. We need exceptions to the HSTPA to respond to the COVID-19. So again, I hope to be the attorney for this area that's able to say to you, this is what I'm hearing well before the curve of June 21st. I don't want to have you wait till the day that this moratorium ends to be able to start the process. I would love to be able to get some guidance of, since June 20th is going to be the date you can get into court, you can file as of this date. But again, this is silent. We don't know what the interpretation of the governor, meaning filing or hearing it or anything, because the courts are still, for all intents and purposes, for evictions closed.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm assuming based on the experiences I've had over the last 20 years with Rochester City Court, June 21st, I'm sure is what they're going to plan on using as our first ability to even serve papers. And they're probably going to toss any other case out of court on that basis alone. That's just my feeling on it. Who knows what will actually happen, but I've never had a really positive experience when it comes to our court system here.
I agree. Rochester specifically, if you told me that was in Buffalo, I might have a different response to you. It's haphazard. Nothing surprises me with the city court, unfortunately. So it's something that, I can't necessarily predict what they're going to do. I just know that they're bound by the rules of what the governor's going to say. So it is going to be something where, the governor has to give some indication. Now, if you caught one of his most recent press conferences, he alluded to there needed to be some procedure in place at the end of this. What that procedure looks like, probably not on his radar right now because of the Apex issue and trying to figure out the hospital numbers. I think that a month from now, we're going to be talking about this again, and we're going to be trying to figure out what it looks like. And hopefully I'll have an answer before then.
Jamie, can I just pitch your services? Because I know you probably wouldn't do it for yourself. I just want to say the experience I've had offline on some of the stuff that I've done with you has been nothing short of exceptional, both you and your staff. So I just wanted to pitch your services to everybody here in the group, because I think you are the utmost in terms of professional. And you answer calls, you answer texts, all you know, you've got so much going on, but you still managed to get it all done. And to me, I just really have a lot of respect for that. Just wanted to share that. For whatever that's worth to anybody here in the group, if you need services, use Jamie.
So this is Leon. Let me just sort of interject. You're looking at Jamie, Cain, and by definition, she's exceptional.
Oh, you guys are so sweet to me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I've known her for a little bit longer than most of you. And at the first day I met her, I knew she was exceptional. And she's continued to prove that as we've gone through the last almost year.
Thank you, guys. I don't even have words for what you're saying, so I'm very much humbled by that. Very much appreciate it.
No, we appreciate you. Thank you.
You guys are more than welcome. Like I said, I'm passionate about this. This is something that, you know, selfishly, I love representing investors. I love representing people who are improving cities. I love what you guys give back. And I want to see that preserved as much as any one of you. And you guys are so hardworking. And, you know, there's stories behind every one of what you guys do. And that just needs to be shared, because you're not greedy landlords. You're not racist landlords. You're not conglomerates made up of hedge funds. And, you know, that's important for me when you look at the revitalization of these cities. And again, I'm not from here. I'm from the New York City area. I just went to Syracuse undergrad and law school and then came back up here. But the quality of life that you get in New York up here, and what we get in schools and the people, everything is just so different than what I grew up in that it's worth fighting for. So I'm happy to do it on every one of your behalfs. And if I can be an Energizer bunny and scream and yell and carry on and fight back after pay tenant advocates, you know, it's because of you I do that.
Let me just interject quickly here. We have 43, 44 people on this call. That's sort of disappointing. I think that a lot of people looked at the call and thought about it from the perspective of the fact that it's primarily associated with landlording. There are a couple of bills that I think are pending associated with things that are associated with flipping houses. Flipping houses is not landlording, okay? And so what we need to have people do and understand is we're not about landlording or flipping or doing any of the other things outside of just landlording. We're about the whole space. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is to ensure that we do the things that's necessary to represent everyone. And the reason why is very simple. Sorry, I should turn my camera on here. The reason why is very simple is, so I'm disappointed with the number of folks. I know that probably next year, what we'll be doing is trying to address what are some of these other new laws that's coming down from Albany and New York City being the prime area that's causing the creation of them, and how do we counteract that? And that's not something that's just associated with landlording. It's associated with the broader real estate and pieces that's associated with investing. We have investors that come from all over the world to invest in Rochester, to invest in Buffalo and upstate New York. They're not looking at New York City, but the laws that's put in place in New York City has an impact on all of us. And so we need to come together as a group, as a coalition, to recognize the fact that we can't not just sit by idly. We need to do the things that are necessary so that we can impact those laws. After all, they make up a very small portion, if you will, of the total state from a geographical standpoint. And so we need to come together. We need to work together as a group. And if we have the same meeting next time, I really want to make sure we've done the things so we have like 100 people.
Leon, just to piggyback off of that, there are actually 199 bills pending that affect the real estate industry right now. Now they're on a break for the next 2 weeks, and things like you mentioned with the flipping, the taxation on that, vacant units where they would tax you if you hold out a vacant unit, you don't rent it. There's all sorts of proposals that I've been monitoring. So to the point of the larger group, yeah, we're talking today about mostly property management roles, but under one roof, we speak for contractors and developers, and we're watching all of those roles too. So it is really something that hopefully, whether you're a big developer or you're a small landlord, the advocacy efforts are targeted to everybody in the entire real estate industry. It just happens that the HSTPA and the good cause eviction piece are so overwhelmingly probably the things that get passed in terms of the next bills, if there were to be anything that are getting the most momentum, that's where the advocacy effort has been focused on. We don't think that the vacancy bill or the flipping bill will get much momentum, but if I hear those things are getting momentum, it's not that we wouldn't shift to them. So just for representation of this group as a whole, like the whole industry is represented.
Leon, if I could just piggyback on what you said as well, I think it's important, regardless of whether you are an actual landlord and you're simply just using the opportunity to invest in real estate in the area, knowing what's happening here and the impacts that it could potentially have either on the lending community and how they perceive this industry, and whether the lending community and the money starts to possibly be directed in other areas rather than this industry. I think those are things that need to be considered as well, because all of these laws impact values, they impact ability to lend down the road, and that's something that should also be considered by the group as well.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Can I say? Am I up?
Yep.
Leon, this is our first virtual meeting online. It's an experimental meeting, and for whatever it's worth, it was great. Regardless of the numbers, don't be discouraged. The momentum will build itself. Tonight was a great combination of Under One Roof and REIA to combine our resources, our synergy, and our groups to create change in New York State. I think these two groups are great together, and others in New York State. So I want to commend Jaime and Leon putting this together, and I think together we can really make change. And Jaime, you're doing a great job.
Ditto.
If I could say something, this is Cheryl. I'm not a landlord, and I come to a lot of these meetings. I'm a wholesaler. I'm a newbie, and I actually haven't even had a deal yet. But I get a tremendous amount from these meetings, and even coming to some of these landlord meetings, I've been very nervous about landlording just because of all of the different things that are going on in the environment and everything. But I come because I need to hear about what's going on. So, being a wholesaler and, working with investors and things, I need to hear about the things that are impacting landlords, because the investors are working with landlords. So when you're putting things on the website about meetings for landlords, not being a landlord, I almost would shy away from coming to some of these. But if somebody who's a wholesaler sees that, putting something on there to entice them to learn more about it from the different perspectives, from the inspector of a wholesaler, and showing them why it would be important to learn from the different perspectives. That would make it more interesting to them, make them understand why they should look at it from a broader perspective. If you're new, you're not going to understand that unless somebody tells you and encourages you to come to the meeting. Having sat through it, I see why. But if somebody hasn't sat through it, they wouldn't know why unless somebody shared it with them. But I'm glad that I came. I learn every time I come, I learn more and more. And your presentation has been wonderful. I've taken so many notes, and it's given me many different resources that I want to look into. And every time I come, I learn so much from you guys. I'm very grateful for all the knowledge you guys are sharing.
Yay.
Jamie, I have a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
Have a tenant, and we're set up. We started the eviction process in February, and everything went through okay. And then we had the date the week that the courts shut down the evictions. We had a date that week. Tenant hasn't been paying rent. He didn't pay January, February, and March. And then, so the date got postponed to May 15th. I just drove by the apartment just to make sure everything was okay at the apartment. And I noticed the gas and electric meters were missing. So I'm concerned about their safety, health and safety in the house. I gave them a notice to come and just inspect the house, and gave them 48 hours notice on the door. Went there, nobody answered the door. So we were concerned, you know, like I said, since the gas and electric meters off the house, RG&E took them off. So we proceeded to go into the house, and all of a sudden the window cracked open and the tenant's in there and starts yelling at us through the window. You know, you can't come in, coronavirus, this, that, the other. Say he's going to call the police. I told him, I said, I wish that you would call the police. I'm concerned about your safety and welfare in here. I just want to come in, make sure you're safe, and check smoke alarms and all that. And he went on, had all the doors barred. So we didn't go in. And, you know, I kept asking him to call the police to come check your safety. And so then the police didn't come. I waited a little bit, and I called the police. And they came about 30 minutes later. And the police talked with him, talked with me. And the police said that we can't go in the house unless there's somebody, they literally said, unless there's somebody dead in the house or blood on the door handle, we can't go in the house. And they instructed me the same thing. So at this point, you know, I'm just waiting for the new date for the eviction. But is there anything for the health and safety of this tenant that we can do, that I can do, or am I just stuck? And that's where I'm at. I'm concerned about his safety.
Yeah. So I'm going to use a client example. We had a scenario where there was a violent offense at a property, and I called over to the court and we explained the situation. I actually had two clients that had the similar situation, both in Rochester City Court. And one was a violent offense where somebody was injured, and one was one where there was a chair thrown through the glass of the front door, and the glass shattered so that there was no door that was viable anymore. In both scenarios, there was violence shown, and here, much like that, there was something, property damage done that is potentially dangerous. We called the court, we gave the scenarios, we gave the police reports, or the information available to us, and I was told by Judge Johnson that even under a situation where we weren't in COVID-19, those wouldn't rise to the level where she would evict someone. So in your scenario, what I was told was the police and the orders they give are the orders you have to live by in the COVID-19 era, and that their court is not going to intercept anything on behalf of the landlord. Now, if you look at the housing court regulation for what they will entertain, if you stop doing something you're supposed to do under a code violation, or you do something to turn off essential services for the landlord, the tenant can take you into court and the court will entertain that. But it doesn't seem like there is going to be, at least in Rochester City Court, and that's the only court that I myself have asked so far on this, but at least in Rochester City, it doesn't seem like anything much short of, you know, at this point, I'm going to say murder, and I don't even know then, I mean, what they would do. I had a pretty violent offense that I was putting forward, and they wouldn't entertain it. So my best educated guess would be you're going to be forced to rely on the police at this time. And if they say you cannot enter, you at least tried to do what you needed to do for the tenant, and you're going to have to wait until the court reopens to deal with it further. and I don't like saying that because I don't think it's a good answer, but that's where we lie.
So Jamie,
Thank you.
it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction, right?
Right.
Everybody has their own interpretation, right? So Scott,
Correct.
what town was this in?
This was Rochester City, both scenarios.
No, Scott.
Yeah, Rochester.
Oh,
And
Scott.
mine was Rochester City too. It's
Oh, you were Rochester City? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
in this.
Yeah,
case.
I mean, if anybody has anything else that's kind of, you know, going on the fringe or definitely in the zone where it's a health and safety risk, I'd be glad to take that on to the court and see if I can get any court in the state of New York to agree to an order to show cause, where we would have some virtual court appearance to decide whether or not the tenant should be removed. You know, much like if somebody is positive for COVID-19 and they've been told they have to quarantine and they don't listen to that order and they're walking around your premise, I know for a fact that they will be arrested and removed from the property. That is what all county officials are saying to us. So there has to be some mechanism where, and I believe in Monroe County, somebody actually was walking around, it wasn't a tenant, but somebody was, you know, outside in the county doing what they were not supposed to be doing, and they were sequestered into quarantine that was state run or county run. So, you know, there are mechanisms that I know that should be intact, but in the two scenarios with the city court, they wouldn't even entertain it. We did run it up to the chief judge also, who wouldn't entertain it. So we tried all areas, and you know.
You got an opinion of Johnson.
What's my opinion?
Her opinion, Johnson.
What's her opinion?
Johnson, right.
Her opinion on the two scenarios was that it did not rise to a level where she would entertain this during a COVID-19 crisis. And even if it were not in a COVID-19 crisis, it would not be, the scenarios I gave her, enough to evict somebody. Now, that may mean, for clarity purposes, that may mean she would want a hearing to determine the factual basis of the allegations and the proof from the police reports. That could be interpreted that was just the message we got, was didn't rise to the level and not going to do it. And because the court's not set up for virtual hearings for eviction purposes, she just said you have to rely on the police.
Any more questions for Jamie? Well, I thought it was absolutely outstanding.
Thank you. I'm so glad you had me on.
Yes, and I'm sure as we get later into the year, and hopefully the COVID-19 items will be behind us, you know, we can have you back.
Absolutely.
And we can talk about all the new things that the folks in Albany are coming up with that we don't know about.
Stay tuned.
I know you have to get off, you know, like a lot of folks, you got work going on and kids going on and a whole bunch of other things going on. And yeah, it's always important to keep focus on what's really, really, really important. But, and from that perspective, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And anything I hear, you know, as a partnership, like I said, this is something we will share every bit of information that I have. We are creating a real estate roundtable page that should be active tomorrow afternoon, where you guys will actually have access to a portal. We're only giving them access to partnerships. So if you work with me as a client, or you are part of my roundtable group, or you are part of a partnership that I work with in under one roof, you will get access to this portal, which will take you to a landing page for all the videos that we've ever done on a roundtable and all the resources, documents and charts and things that we put up. You'll have access to that. So that should go live tomorrow. I know they were finalizing that. And so I will make sure you guys have all the information for the password on that. And I ask that you don't share that with other attorneys for that purpose. This is something that we are trying to make sure stays with Boylan and be a resource for anyone who works with me specifically, whether or not you're a client or just a partner in the advocacy group. It's something special we're trying to do to make it so that you guys know how special you are to me and to our firm. So we'll keep you updated. You know, I'm doing daily lives right now. So again, anyone who's interested, every day at 2 o'clock. Sometimes I have no idea what I'm about to say, and then I get a question from a client, we talk about it. So we'll keep the information rolling in a variety of sources, and just so happy to partner with this group. You guys are such a wealth of information, and I stand to learn from all of you, and I look forward to meeting every one of you at a picnic in the future soon. Under One Roof is going to try and do a golf event maybe in the fall, and we will be doing a president's lunch at Turning Stone again to commemorate the 400 people we have. Probably won't be in September at this rate, but it will be something where there will be opportunities to network and to thank each other for the efforts for this year, and then going into next session, be aware of what we still need to do, because this is going to be a legislative fight for the real estate industry, especially with people not taking money from the real estate industry and this progressive left-wing movement that we're seeing roll out of New York City. So it's going to be an uphill battle for a while. You know, I joke at a certain point, some of you may see me run because it's just, it's so infuriating what's going on. So we'll see. Stay tuned.